All right, perfect. Hello. Hold on, I gotta edit this. It keeps being funky today. Give me 1 second. Get this going. Awesome. We are now live. So, hello and happy Thursday. Welcome to another Purse Strings Lunch and Learn. If you're new to Purse Strings, we're all about providing tips, tricks, pieces of advice on how to be financially fearless. And then when you're ready to either sell your house, plan for retirement, plan for your kids, make a will and a trust, we have top tier financial professionals willing, ready, and able to serve you. We call those our Purse Strings approved professionals, and Vivian Villers is one of them. We're so excited to have her here today to talk about investing for your special needs child and all that entails. Vivian is quite the expert. But before we dive into all that fun, Vivian, could you give us a little intro of who you are and what you do?
Thank you. Thank you, Maggie. My name is Vivian Villers. I'm a certified financial planner and accredited investment fiduciary. I've been in practice over 30 years. I'm independent. I don't have anybody holding a hatchet over my head telling me what I have to sell or what I have to do. And I got into working with people, parents with children with disabilities, because I was teaching a basic financial planning seminar back in the 90s, and a parent came to me and they had a son who had been physically injured at 14, and I went, okay, my learning curve has to go up here.
Yep.
So, but I'm proud of the fact I've been in practice for over 30 years and I still enjoy what I do. And I'm located just north of Chicago, but I have clients all over the country, from Washington State to Florida to California, Texas, and all over the Midwest. So
Awesome. Well, we're so excited to have you here and have you share your expertise. If anyone's tuning in and has questions along the way, feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll work on those. Otherwise, we'll come back around to them. But investing kind of in preparing for a child with disabilities, there's a lot of different moving parts. And so can we just kind of start with like a brief explanation of how kind of the government benefits work, when the child is eligible, and any kind of restrictions, especially if they exceed income limits?
great. For most parents who have a child with a disability, they are eligible to apply for two different government benefits. They're kind of a package. The first one is SSI, and that stands for Supplemental Security Income. It's a form of disability payment that the federal government provides for people who have never worked. I have a nephew, Stephen, who was born with severe autism. He's eligible for SSI. And when you are eligible for SSI, typically you also get Medicaid. For most parents, they're not really eligible, or they don't qualify to get these benefits until their child is 18. Because when the child is under 18, they will include the parents' income and assets. And unless you're pretty much borderline poverty, you won't get those benefits. But at age 18, when you have a confirmed diagnosis, and you qualify, Social Security will only include that child's income and assets. And think about this: Medicaid is basically welfare. So the restrictions, you can't have more than $2,000 in assets.
Wow.
And very little, if any, income. So if you earn $10 in a dividend on those $2,000 of asset, all of a sudden you're over the limit. But it doesn't matter how competent or not competent that child is. The government considers them an adult and only looks at their income and assets after age 18.
Okay. So yeah, it seems like 18 is a big one. And then it kind of depends how much income. So usually if you're living with your parents, they'll make enough income where you don't get covered. Do you know, are those income limits different everywhere to qualify for the SSI?
No, this is the federal government.
Okay. Oh yeah, you're right.
No, yeah. So, and I'm trying to give just a basic overview because I'm not the benefits expert. I have somebody I go to
Right.
about that. But yes, you just need to know this much so that you can begin to prepare. For example, I'm a little bit off track, but let me give you this. Let's say your great Aunt Sally gave your child some stock when they were born.
Mm-hmm.
and you know it's going to probably disqualify you from receiving government benefits. And you want those government benefits. You
Mhm.
do, because health insurance can be outrageously expensive, and you want that Medicaid to be a supplement, and you want some income for your child. But there are things you can legally do to those assets that may be in your child's name before they turn 18.
Right. So it's just kind of that reallocation and kind of redefining where that money is. So on paper, you look like you qualify for the.
Even if you spend it down, if you buy your
Yeah.
if you sell the stock and buy your child a computer or a cell phone,
Hmm.
it's in their name, you can use it legally for their name, or we could transfer it into one or another kind of an account we can get into later.
Okay, cool, cool. So just kind of like moving along here, we know, many individuals with disabilities will live in a residential facility. And so, why does a parent need to provide additional resources beyond kind of what the government benefits are?
Well, a parent needs to provide additional resources while the child is living with them, but if the child ends up going into a residential facility. Because right now, if you are in a facility where your child is living, the government, SSI, only lets you keep $30 a month for incidentals. They may get a little bit more in a different state, but that's the federal Social Security maximum. And the rest of it goes towards that maybe group home or a residential facility or something to help defray their costs. Well, think about this. Your son wants to order a pizza, there goes the $30 allotment for the whole month. Or how are you going to pay for the cell phone if your child is capable of having a cell phone, or a TV in their room if the facility allows it, or internet, or
Yeah.
a computer? So, yes, you need to have other resources. And even if the child is not in a facility, there's a lot of things that insurance won't pay for, special kinds of therapy,
Hmm.
equine therapy, which can be very, very helpful. So, yes, you need, if you can afford it, you need to provide extra money.
Yeah, definitely. And that's really why we want to talk about this, is because we know it is an added expense that a lot of parents need to plan for. And that's why we really want them to be prepared. So what are some different types of accounts that can be used to provide additional assets or support for your child? And how are those kind of used?
There are three different kinds of accounts where parents can set aside money to provide that additional resource or support while you are alive as a parent, and perhaps your child is living with you or not, and it continues after you are gone. Let me name three of them and then give you the description of each. Special Needs Trust, OBRA 93 Trust, OBRA, and an ABLE account. Okay. Special Needs Trust, I tell my clients it starts with an S. It's someone else's money. You know, Grandpa Joe, Great Aunt Sally left money and they put it in the Special Needs Trust. It can't go to your child because then they would be eliminated from getting benefits. So they go into a Special Needs Trust, or this is where the parents can also put assets into that trust. So there are not as many restrictions on how you use that money for that child. That's the Special Needs Trust, starts with an S, someone else's money, meaning someone other than the person with the disability.
Hmm.
OBRA 93, very complicated word. What it really stands for is, this is the fun piece, Omnibus Reconciliation Act of 1993. It was a tax act, and hidden in there is this little thing that allows you to have this kind of a trust. It's also known as a payback trust, or as one of my friends who does benefit applications calls it, an oops trust. Um, and the money that's in there was originally owned by the person with the disability. Here we're coming up to grandma, Grandpa Joe gave your child a whole bunch of stock when they were born. It's $50,000. Thanks, Grandpa Joe and Aunt Sally. It's
Yeah, thank you.
$50,000. or which actually happened to a person that I know. They were reasonably capable, like had Down syndrome, and pulled the lever in Las Vegas and won the supreme jackpot.
Go them.
Yeah, but now this is in their social security number.
Yeah.
Or maybe you set aside money for a college fund and they're not going to use it. You can legally transfer that money into an OBRA 93 trust. This is called a payback trust because you can turn around then and qualify for SSI and Medicaid, or maintain your Medicaid benefits if you won the jackpot, in Las Vegas. And you are more restrictive on how you can use that money. And when the child with a disability dies, Medicaid comes in and gets paid back.
Oh.
So Medicaid says, okay, you can set aside this money that's in your name. You don't have to spend it down to zero for you to get benefits, but we're going to be very restrictive on how you can use this. And when that child dies, the remaining money, if any, doesn't go to a family member, it goes to Medicaid. And here's an example. Let's say you had $150,000 in the account and your child died, and Medicaid comes in and says, you owe, we paid out $200,000 during your lifetime. They take the entire account balance of 150, but it's non-recourse. There's no other place they can go to get the 50,000 shortfall. The reverse is true. You got 150, Medicaid says we paid out 100. They take the 100, you've got $50,000 left in your OBRA 93 payback trust. That can go to another family member. Okay. The third type of account, which is relatively new, it's only been in establishment for maybe 5 years, is called the ABLE account. And it refers to the account for a better living experience.
I like that.
Yeah, this is one exception where you can have up to $100,000 in the account in your child's social security number, and they don't lose benefits.
Oh, good.
And it's usually state specific. Like here in Illinois, if you don't use you can use the Ohio version or the Colorado version, but if you don't use the Illinois version, they will tax withdrawals from a ABLE account from a different state. So you try and use the state one. Usually it's from a bank, and they may give you a debit card. Now, if your child is not competent to, spend that money on their own, then the parent can just become a designated person to handle the account. Only one account, one. Maximum of the gifting limit, usually about $15,000, can be contributed during a calendar year. So again, if Great Aunt Sally wants to give your son some money in the ABLE account, but we've only got $2,000 left to be given or before we reach the maximum, she may want to give him an IOU and say, I'll put it in next January.
Yeah.
15,000 maximum from all contributes. And if the child is able to earn some money and have a modest amount of income, they can also deposit that in there. Go over $100,000, again, get 10 cents of interest. You get suspended from benefits and have to reapply. That's the ABLE account. Special Needs Trust, very generous, the family's assets. OBRA 93, your own assets. ABLE account, a combination of parents' assets and the child's assets, but it's in the child's social security number.
Okay. And so for that ABLE account, what happens if, the child passes away? Does that
Money
go back
goes
to
to
the
the
parents?
family.
It goes to family?
Yeah.
Wow. Those are great. 3 great options, very clear. And it's nice to know that there are these workarounds because of the way it's kind of set up. And that's why we say you need somebody who understands it like you do, because otherwise, if those benefits are turned off, then, alarm bells ring.
It's a mess to have to go back and reapply, please.
And if you need, prescriptions in the middle or something with your health insurance, it's a mess. So
Right.
It's great to kind of know these things and to know how we can prepare ourselves. And so let me see what are some different types of investments like bonds, IRAs, stocks, insurance that can be used to provide for current and future support. And, again, those pros and cons.
I typically the money that's in an ABLE account, most parents don't have large balances and it's just maybe cash at the bank. But where the money becomes more critical is in the special needs trust, someone else's money, an inheritance, whatever, or the Obra 93 trust. Again, you won the big jackpot in Las Vegas, or Grandpa Joe left you 50,000 in stocks and you transferred that into the Obra account. Now what do? If you are if you're still alive and you're trying to provide additional support for your child, beyond what the government benefits will provide, whether it's OBRA or in the special needs trust, typically you're going to want things that are fairly liquid, like
Mhm.
mutual funds, exchange traded funds, individual stocks, or bonds. But you need to be careful because whether it's an OBRA or a special needs trust, it is a trust. A trust is a different form of ownership and will be taxed at a
Mhm.
much, much higher rate on any income that's earned. So if you're not that knowledgeable or you run into a financial advisor who doesn't understand this and they say, oh, let's be conservative and buy you a bunch of bonds, well, all of a sudden you've got a whole bunch of income that's coming out of those bonds, but held within the trust. And the trust tax rate starts at about 35% and goes up from there.
Wow.
So, not that you don't want bonds, but you want to be careful what you're doing. And it's the
Right.
same thing with any realized gain. You can't pass that through to the child because that might go over their income. You may be able to take the money out and
Mhm.
spend it, but you still have to pay the tax. But liquid investments are good for while you are alive.
Okay.
Then when the parent dies, they leave a big, or even a family member. Again, great Aunt Sally, Uncle, Grandpa Joe can leave investments such as stocks or bonds into that. The other things that can be left when when the parent dies, is life insurance or IRAs. Excuse me.
Yeah, taking a little sip there. You're got too much great information.
Okay, IRAs. Let's start with life insurance first. Okay, a life insurance policy is the most cost-effective way to provide a large sum of money. Okay,
Mm.
but the parent needs, if they're applying for new insurance, the parent needs to be healthy enough to
Yeah.
be qualified and obtain life insurance. And then there's the issue also of the cost of the insurance, if you will. Um, Now, sometimes they can take an existing life insurance policy and just change the beneficiaries on it to go into the special needs trust. By
Yeah.
the way, I highly recommend that the special needs trust, which needs to be drafted by an attorney, be done during the parent's lifetime. I had a client who went to a lawyer who was not that experienced in the area and made the trust be established at the parent's death. And I
Right.
go, wait a minute. You could be 85, and what happens if your parents, grandparents, great Aunt Sally dies? They have no place they can leave any inheritance to your child. So I
Yeah.
highly recommend you have it established as soon as you can. Okay, so that's life insurance. Okay, and you hopefully can get some. And the other one is IRAs, because that's usually a parent's largest asset when they die. Once again, there's a little bit of a tax problem here that you need to be aware of. You name the special needs trust as the beneficiary of the IRA. So
Right.
here's your trust box, and inside the trust box is your IRA. It stays as an IRA. Okay. Then you have, as soon as the parent dies, required minimum distributions that must come out of that IRA every year. Again, you most likely can't pass it on to the child outside of the trust because of income limitations or asset limitations. So the distribution from the IRA could be held inside the trust and taxed at the trust tax rate. So
Okay.
what I'm doing lately is suggesting to clients and parents that they consider, if they're planning to leave an IRA or part of their IRA to the special needs trust, that they try to convert part of their IRAs to a Roth IRA. You have to pay the tax when you convert, and sometimes parents can't afford that, but you can do it in small stages. Then you name the Roth IRA, and you still have required distributions that come out of the IRA and go into the trust, but it's tax free because the
Mm.
parents have already paid the tax on the IRA when they converted from a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA.
Okay. Okay.
So
Wow. It's quite a dance around these benefits and the right way to have them under your name, not under your name, to still qualify.
right. And the other thing is, let me just interject here. You parents need to be very clear and aware of how much they really will need for themselves, but for their child's support. I had a person who took one of my classes that I teach, and she said, "Oh, we're 72, and my husband and I have $1 million in asset. We don't need any life insurance." And I go, "Have you crunched the numbers to see how much you're going to be able to draw down?" And in my opinion, she was completely unaware that $1 million was not enough to fund her retirement and that of her husband and leave anything significant for their child at their
Yeah.
death. You've got to crunch the numbers.
Yeah, and that's hard to do because you never know how long you might live, what life is going to look like. It's a hard prediction to make, and you definitely want to be over rather than under.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and we talk about this and all the work that these parents can do, but it's so essential that they also, put their retirement as a priority as well, and not lose themselves. And so how can you kind of balance this or, yeah, what's the secret, Vivian? How do you do it?
Well, there's not any secret, but let me give you the way I approach it. I tell the parents, you need to do an audit or an assessment of your own financial situation first. And I
Mhm.
know that, as parents, people always put their child first, but you can't put your child first and then have them living with you after you're retired and you've already put money in those trusts where you can't get the money back
Yeah.
and you're having trouble paying the house expenses. So do an assessment of all of your assets, do an assessment of, are you on track for what you're going to need during retirement? And that will also help you to know how much money you may have, luckily, to set aside now into a special needs trust if you
Yeah.
can. But you don't want to be, say, sending out, let's say, $500 a month into the special needs trust. Let's make it $1,000 a month into the special needs trust and find out it should have been 500.
Right.
And the
Yeah.
only way you can get it back out of these trusts is to spend the money on things that the government allows you to spend it on. You can't take it out and use it to buy, groceries for the parents if the child is living in a residential facility, or pay
Right.
the mortgage if they're not living with them. So yes, do an assessment first, and also take a look at all your beneficiary designations, because maybe you made a blanket designation of all my children as a
Mm.
contingent, and you could have to go do an oops trust because there's money that came to your child and you didn't realize it.
Right, right. Those are great pieces of advice. I mean, at first I could see, yeah, you can easily just say all my children, which is you can't always group them together like that. Um, but yeah, planning it out because not all that money you can use the same way again after it's been kind of invested. And so, can you kind of tell us, why is it so important to like not delay? We need to take action now. And I can just tell you're so passionate about this. Where does that come from?
Well, I say to people these days, your next crisis is not on your calendar. And I learned that, unfortunately, from personal experience with a family member. 10 years ago, my sister-in-law, mother of Stephen, my nephew, Stephen has severe autism and is nonverbal. If you know anybody who has a child with autism, they're basically OCD. You disrupt their environment or their structure, their daily
Okay.
activities, and they basically go into a panic attack. They can't create plan B in the moment. They physically cannot. My sister-in-law was killed coming home from the bank. She ran into town to go to the bank just for a few minutes and get home in time to meet Steven's bus. He was coming home from a daycare program. She was killed instantly. No matter how many times I said to her, we've got to make plans for what happens to Stephen down the road. Yeah. And I absolutely understand. This is what happens with parents of a child with a disability. You're so overwhelmed with just day-to-day tasks, going to work, cooking, cleaning the house, managing your finances, taking care of your other children, and then focusing on your child with a disability. This is the thing that gets kicked down the road.
Right.
And it was absolute chaos because my sister-in-law had not done the planning. And this is kind of macabre, but this is what I say. The people who died in 9/11 didn't have it on their calendar.
Yeah.
Whether you're 35, 55, or 85, you never know what the next day is going to bring. And so because of the chaos that my family lived through, first responders were going knocking on neighbors' doors, going, do you know this person? My brother was out of state in Kentucky on business. Stephen was 10 minutes away coming home to a dark, locked house.
Yeah.
I saw how many times he had an autistic meltdown in the following week. It wasn't fair to do that to him. So that's why I'm so passionate about this. And as a matter of fact, based on that whole event that I lived through within my family, during COVID lockdown, I spent a lot of time and I created what I call the special needs crisis checklist, and I give it away.
It's I have it up. I'm going to put it in the comments.
Okay. It's a one-page fillable form. Keep it in your purse. Keep it in your glove compartment. Don't put it on your phone. Your phone could get out the window and get lost. And it gives all the information about who to call for the person that's injured, all the information about the child and who to call to help or to communicate. First responders wouldn't know if Stephen was autistic and nonverbal or hard of hearing or spoke Korean or was in shock. And I did that. Okay. So there's 3 phases that I work with for parents in planning. How do you plan and what do you do while you're alive and your child is with you? Maybe it's setting aside resources to supplement what benefits will do. You've got to do the planning, estate planning for what happens after you are gone. Do you have a residential facility picked out? Do they go there while you're alive or not? Who's going to be in charge of the money after you're gone? And by the way, a lot of times I recommend don't name a sibling as the successor trustee, because if you've got a tight relationship and your child maybe is more high functioning and your son Billy goes to his sister Susie and says, I need money. And Susie says, I don't think you should have that money. Now Billy's mad at his sister. Instead, name somebody else, a trusted family friend, Uncle Bob, somebody else. Uncle Bob will go to Susie and say, does Billy really need the money? But Billy won't be angry at Susie.
Right.
But it's a lot to put on a sibling to ask them to be responsible for stuff like that. But if there's anything I can do based on what I lived through with that week when there was no plan in place, is to say to people, please. And I tell them, use a holiday. We've got Passover coming up for Jewish people. We've got Easter coming up, or you can pick Memorial Day and say, okay, by Memorial, I think holidays are easier to remember as deadlines.
Yeah.
By Memorial Day, I'm going to do an assessment of my financial things, and I'm going to find a lawyer or meet with the financial planner to start that plan in place. I'm going to download the checklist and fill it out and share it with people.
I think it's so important. And after looking at the checklist, I mean, if someone came to my door and told me that my mom died in a car crash, I'd be a wreck. But much less if you are, nonverbal or have different, loud noises and you have firemen banging on the door, that's a lot of triggers. And so having that sheet that just kind of says real quickly, like, this is how I need to be talked to or cared for, and this is who you can call to kind of be that translator, is essential just to ease the moment, much less before we even dive into finances.
Yeah, and by the way, I actually have a client whose child is completely dependent,
Mm-hmm.
lives with them, is on oxygen, needs to be fed. I mean, they really are severely disabled. Think about if you were maybe you survived the crash, but you're in the emergency room and your spouse forgot that in the crisis I got to get to the hospital. You got a piece of paper in your purse, in your car, and it tells them where else to find other papers at home that says, wait a second, I got this kid at home. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
they're on medication and they need to get it soon because they have a seizure disorder.
Yeah.
That's all on that checklist.
Yeah, it's essential. It's essential. So I think setting a date is a great idea. Like you said, I can put the link to the special needs checklist in the chat, and put that on your calendar. Put making this time, because the crisis is not on there. So let's just put on this time to, make a plan, book a time with Vivian, call an estate planner. We have all these resources for you. Let's just take some action. Because like Vivian says, this crisis is not on your calendar.
And I'm happy to provide a free initial consultation to people who really want to talk, about this. So,
Awesome. Yep. Cool. So I think this has been so much great information today. I love seeing your passion and your story come through as well. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you want to make sure is shared?
um, I think I've covered most of it. Oh, yes, one other quick little thing, real quick. If you feel that you don't have enough assets while you're alive to afford an attorney to set up a special needs trust or an over 93 trust, or you don't have somebody that you feel can handle these trusts after you're gone, there is something called a pooled trust, usually with a charity that's affiliated with a disability. And they have a pooled trust. Your money gets pooled with others, but they will administer it. They will file the tax returns, and it takes a lot, and it's very low cost if you don't have a lot of assets right now.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you'll have more life insurance after you're gone. And the only difference is that when your child dies, the charity keeps the remaining money.
Yeah.
But, there is an option for people that maybe don't have a lot of financial resources to set aside for this right now while they're alive.
So not having a plan is not an option. There are resources out there. There are options out there. Let's make a plan.
If you're overwhelmed, I get it. But
Yeah.
you should not have what happened to my nephew Stephen happen to you. And
Mm-hmm.
as parents, you have an obligation to do what you can to prepare for that child who didn't ask to come into this life with the disability.
Yeah.
I have a cousin whose daughter has severe Down syndrome. They targeted a residential facility for her when she was 5 years old.
Wow.
And when her last brother was out of the house and she was left alone all day, she simply moved to this lovely private residential facility, and she's thriving.
Good
But
for
they
her.
started planning when their daughter was born.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like when people look at preschools before they have their kid. But yeah, you got to be prepared. That's a great story. So I appreciate you again coming on here and sharing that information. Your email has been going through the bottom. Vivian's also a Purse Strings approved professional, so you can check her out on our site, pursestrings.co. And I'll make sure to put that special needs crisis checklist in the chat as well, so you guys can download that. But thank you, Vivian, for sharing all your great information. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone else, for tuning in today.
One quick thing, so sorry. The special needs checklist, it doesn't download. You send me your email and I send it to you, so it comes in a PDF fillable page just for you.
Perfect. All right,
Thanks,
cool.
Maggie.
Thank you, and we'll talk to everyone soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.